Hey folks, David Stewart here. Hope you guys are having a great day. So occasionally I get asked this question: what's your favorite book in the Lord of the Rings? Because some people like the first one, the third one. Well, the answer is Fellowship of the Ring. And if you're getting really specific, it's book one in Fellowship of the Ring. There are 6 books divided into 3 volumes. Fellowship of the Ring, Two Towers, and Return of the King each have 2 of the books. So book 1 is actually my favorite book in the entire series. There's a lot of reasons for this, including nostalgia for when I was first reading the book. But I really love the entirety of Fellowship of the Ring because it does some things that the other books don't do. First of all, it is on its own an Odyssey kind of adventure. You are traveling across the land having adventures. That's one of the things I really like about The Hobbit, by the way, is that it has this sort of Odyssey plot format. But it's not just that. It's really the deep feeling and the deep themes that are actually exposed throughout the book. The main one is a departure from the modern and going back into the mythic past. That is one of the strongest feelings and themes that you get within Fellowship of the Ring. And it changes quite a bit once you get to the Two Towers and Return of the King, how that entire thing ends up playing out. But one of the things that I really like about the book is that it starts in the Shire. And the Shire shows hobbits. And hobbits are people. They're a diverse group of people, but they're fundamentally decent people, and they have a decent society. They live mostly peacefully, and it's not exactly a paradise because there are, bad hobbits and good hobbits and some people that don't get along with each other. But one of the first things that you get in the book is this reference to the past, right? We have Bilbo's ring and we're wondering where it comes from. And before we even begin the book, we have this poem about the Rings of Power kind of setting the stage for what you're going to get in the tale. But we have this scene with Samwise. Sam, he's at the pub and he's talking to various other hobbits, and all of the hobbits have a very modern or materialistic kind of view. They are not really believing of the mythic history of Middle Earth, whereas Sam was saying he heard about a tree walking around. Of course, that's a reference to Ents, who they're going to meet much later on in book 2. At least 2 of the hobbits will. So we have this reference. Maybe the fairy tales are true. Maybe there are myths. Maybe the myths are real. Maybe the myths are part of our history. And most of the hobbits are oblivious to it. They count all of their history in terms of their own years from when they founded the Shire. They don't really care for the history that went before it. They're very self-obsessed. And in that sense, they kind of represent a little bit of the, not just the English country folk, that's a surface level thing, but the kind of modern peasant, which is a person who just doesn't really think about the mythic past very much. They're very much in the now. They're not bad. They're decent people. The Shire is a really good place to be, and it has its own history, and you get to explore that a lot in book 1. But one of the first things that happens is that peaceful, kind of serene, everlasting time of the Shire's always the same gets disturbed by the presence of this ring, which forces the characters into action. First Bilbo, and then of course Gandalf and Frodo have to go into action. And you get this chapter called The Shadow of the Past, where you learn the history of the ring. You learn the myths of the past in the world that Tolkien has created, and how that is affecting the characters in the now. So you have this reference to ancient history having an impact in the now. Then the hobbits, of course, go on an odyssey that takes them backward in time. So the first place they go after they go to Crick Hollow, and they escape into the Old Forest. And it's a good name because it's a very old forest. And in the Old Forest, there is an uncanny feeling. The forest seems to have a mind of its own. And I can honestly identify with this, especially having traveled through a lot of forests in the western United States. There's an ominous feeling to old, untamed forests that I just don't get quite as much here in Texas. The forests just feel a little bit more pleasant out here, but the forests of the Sierra Nevadas can be very frightening at night and have a much more oppressive feel to them. People who've done a lot of hiking, they might resonate with that sense, but I get that with the Old Forest. And I remember as a kid reading this section, and it just reminded me so much of camping in these weird places with my dad, and sort of the spooky feeling that you get from really ancient forests. Of course, we have trees in the Sierra Nevadas that were or that are thousands of years old. Very, very ancient trees that are older than any person and older than the history of anyone that lived here on the continent. They just are amazing, right? But I get that feeling with the Old Forest. So the Old Forest is uncanny. It's hostile to them. They end up with an encounter with a living tree, Old Man Willow, who attempts to eat them. So besides the disruption of the ring wraiths, who we don't really know who they are, we just know that they're guys wearing black. They're black riders and they're bad guys. That's more or less all we really know about them at the beginning. We aren't fully aware of their somewhat demonic nature. But when you get into the Old Forest, that's when you first have the uncanny feeling of the ancient nature. Nature as an untamed force that is hostile to people and is something that should be really worried about. Then, of course, they're saved by Tom Bombadil. Tom Bombadil represents like a primal spirit. So the first place that they journey when they're journeying back into the past, into the primal past of pre-people, of prehistory, of people not existing yet. You could maybe think even before the first age, before the stars, the very first shaping of Arda, where there were, forests that were undeveloped and things were not fully formed. You had Tom Bombadil, the master of the land. So that's who they meet. They meet this spirit of the very, very ancient earth, a spirit so ancient none of the changes of earth can really affect him. And he's preserved this little domain in time of the untamed wilderness. That's the first thing they get, is the ancient untamed wilderness before people. The next place they go is the Barrow Dance. Now the Barrow Dance are from the men of Numenor. They're from the fallen kings of Arnor, the northern kingdom, which has become the lost realm of Arnor. Now the hobbits aren't really aware of who's buried there. They just have heard ghost stories about ghosts coming to live in these barrows. But the barrows, of course, are tombs. And they get trapped in one of the tombs and end up with some ancient sword. So they get a tool from the past. They get some relics from the past that they can eventually, one of them, Mary puts it to good use in actually helping to slay one of the Nazgul who was prophesied to never be killed by a man. Of course, he was killed by a hobbit and a woman. So it was it's a good little poetic fulfillment there. But those barrows, that's the ancient kingdom of men from the second age of men after the fall of Numenor. So it's very old, but it's been forgotten. We get this with the Barrow Dance. No one is there to hold any kind of rites. No one's there to pray for the dead. No one's there to remember who was buried there or why. The few people who maybe know about it are, very isolated. They're Aragorn's kin. We don't meet them yet in the book, but when we're going through the book, that's what we have. We have this going back in time to ancient tombs and ancient burials and ghosts that have taken up residence in there. And there's, again, that uncanny feeling. They're once again saved by Tom Bombadil. That's great. Then they go to Bree, and Bree is a little bit of a return to normalcy. It's just a breath. And again, that's disturbed a little bit by this attack of the Nazgul. But even as you get this return to normalcy, you realize there's this debate over how old the Shire is and whether the Shire was settled by Bree. So they're stepping back a little bit further in time from their own perception of the importance of the Shire. Then they go off into the wilderness, and then of course there's Amon Sul, Weathertop, which is this ancient ruin, another ruin of the Númenóreans that is still remembered by a very few people, but no one else really knows anything about it. It's just a ruin of a castle up on a hill. Maybe you can get up there and look around the land, but you're not going to really do much. But again, you're stepping back in time and you're seeing the remnants. They've seen the remnants of the past of men, but they haven't lived them yet. Then, of course, you get to Rivendell. And Rivendell is a preservation of the Third Age in a capsule, right? Because you have Elrond, who... The master of Rivendell, he has a ring of power. All this is revealed later in the books, but you get the sense that you've stepped out of what was this kind of sensible, very easy to grasp, down-to-earth society into something more ancient. And indeed, that's what the Elven rings are all about. They're about preserving preserving the elements of the past as they were. Once they leave Rivendell, they travel down through Holland, where elves once were, and Legolas remarks how, almost everything is forgotten that the elves lived there. The animals don't remember it. Maybe the rocks remember it, but that's it. But again, you're traveling through time and you're missing everything's forgotten. What was has been forgotten, and they're traveling through an ancient world where no one really remembers the history of what was there. And then, of course, you get to Moria, to Khazad-dûm. And Khazad-dûm is this wonderful relic of better times that has become dark, and it's kind of encapsulates the entire feeling of Middle Earth at this point, which is that there were all these amazing works done and they've fallen into ruins. The people have fallen. The hobbits are little people because people have become little over time. The great Edain of the past have dwindled to almost nothing and been replaced by lesser men. The elves are leaving Middle Earth. So all of the great preservation, the memory of the mythic past is starting to fail. But here in Moria, you have this, again, a ruin of what the past was, but it's more present and it's more dangerous and there's more memories there, and the dwarves still care very much about it, this ancient mansion that they had. And there's elements that show that the dwarves and the elves were friends and they traded a lot and they had magic doors. So as you continue to get further away from the Shire, not only do things become more frightening and uncanny, but there's more magic at play. There's magic at play in Rivendell. There's magic at play when they open the doors of Moria. And of course, inside of Moria is the Balrog, a fallen angel type fierce demon that Gandalf has to face and eventually face his own destruction with. Once they leave Moria, they've left the ruins. They have finally arrived at Lothlorien, at the Forest of Lorien, where Galadriel lives, and that is a preservation of the First Age. So they've gone even further back in time. Khazad-dûm existed in the First Age, maybe even further back than that. I'm not completely certain about that because of the way things are worded in the Silmarillion, whether Moria began after, in the ages of stars at some point, or began after the rise of the sun. But it's certainly very ancient. But what Galadriel's preserved is, and Tolkien emphasizes this multiple times, that the grass is greener. It looks like a thing newly named, like a thing that has just come into being and has not suffered the slow corruption of sin, which is part of Tolkien's Catholic worldview. So the preservation of this First Age in its kind of pure glory is something that's really emphasized in that. They lose track of time. They don't know how long they spend there. And in fact, they when they're leaving, Sam gets confused. He's like, surely we didn't spend a month there. And everyone's like, we did spend a month there. But you lose track of time because of the power of the place. The power of the place is almost like a heaven. It's a refuge from the passage of time. It's a preservation of what the elves actually care about, which is the purity of what existed right at the beginning of things. The trees look like they looked like when they were first made. The grass looks like what it looks like when it was first made. And again, why do these things fall into ruin? Why do the trees become less beautiful? Why does the grass become less green? I believe that's part of Tolkien's Christian worldview about the influence of sin in the fallen world, that the world it becomes more corrupt and less pure to the intent of the maker as time goes on. It's not that God is not in control. In fact, that's emphasized throughout the books, that essentially there's a higher power that is at work making sure things come to their proper conclusion. But rather that there's the sin in the world continues to corrupt and make things not as they were. The designs of the Valar have been destroyed by Melkor and upended, and it's always referenced that's always to the glory of the Iluvatar, to God, but it's still not as pure as it was originally designed. So you have that reference there. Once you leave Lothlorien, you've left this entire sequence where Frodo and the other hobbits have traveled back in time. And when you get to the breaking of the Fellowship, you're back in the ruins of the real world. You're back at the Falls of Raros. You're in the ruins of Numenor again. With these ancient statues of people that almost everyone's forgotten except for Aragorn. Even the people of Gondor don't really remember who these ancient kings really were. It's barely remembered, any of this mythic past that helped build the world. And this is sort of the newest one. And so at that point, that's really when the Fellowship breaks. And it's also one of the most despairing moments because Frodo knows he has to leave people because of the corrupting influence of the ring. And I think he also knows, and he's known throughout the adventure, that there's really no going back to the way things were. There's no going back to the Shire, but there's no going back to Arnor. There's no going back to Lothlorien. If he succeeds in his quest, the power of the rings will be undone. Rivendell and Lothlorien, these preservations of beauty, will eventually fall. They'll become subject to the passage of time. They'll eventually fall into decay and ruin and be abandoned, the way that all of these structures of men are abandoned. So it's just such a deep feeling that you get walking through an ancient world in the first book, in Fellowship of the Ring. Once you get past that breaking of the fellowship point where, you know, sin manifests itself in the party, Boromir betrays everyone, Frodo and Sam have to run away, then we're back in the conflict of the now. We've gone from the now all the way through time, experiencing the mythic past of Middle-earth, back to the present and the realities of the present, that we can no longer preserve those things. We can only go forward and hope to save some future for our descendants, and that's what we have to hope for. And so book 2 and 3, or I should say book 1 and 2 are in here, but volumes 2 and 3, Two Towers and Return of the King, really deal with the playing out of that theme, which is really expanded in this first book. So why is this one my favorite? Well, it has the longest trip and the biggest history of Middle-earth, and the first time I read it, there was this depth of feeling to the world that's really difficult to describe if you haven't read Lord of the Rings. If you've read other fantasy books, this is not to say anything bad about any other fantasy book, but there's something special about the way Tolkien, in particular, does his narrative, always looking backwards and taking elements from this mythic past and bringing them forward and letting you know that there's a history there. There's people that were once here, once but long ago, you know, and that they were important and they did great things which ought to be remembered. So most of those things, by the way, if you're interested, are in the Silmarillion. This is a book that I notice a lot of casual fans don't love because it's people said it's like a history book. To me, it's like a collection of mythic fiction. Many short stories about mythic figures from the past. And I do recommend this version, by the way, illustrated by Ted Nasmith. Just some beautiful pictures if you're looking for a good hardback version of the Silmarillion. There's just some amazing pictures that you can see in here, like I think this is the burning of the ships, right? Yeah, this is the burning of the ships. It's just some great paintings to look at in this volume in particular. So I think a lot of people picked this up and it didn't have a strong narrative like Lord of the Rings did, and so they're like, I don't know what to do with this. If you're wanting a strong narrative that has that's from the mythic past, check out The Children of Húrin. That's probably my biggest recommendation for a complete book drawn out of the stories that you're going to find in the Silmarillion. So the Lord of the Rings constantly references the tales in this book enough that it made me want to go read this almost right away. And I've probably read the Silmarillion more than I've read Lord of the Rings, because it was a book that I used to just keep around and open up and read a story. And even though it's fictional, it had that feeling of mythic fiction if you're into really like the classics. If you're into Greek drama or like to read the Iliad or other epic poetry and stuff like that, it has a feeling that's associated like that, like this important tale from the past, a legend, if you will. So anyway, there's that. That's why that one's my favorite, is because that feeling is so profound to me and had such a big effect on me. It's not to say the other two books aren't great. I really enjoyed them as well. They're much more present and they're pushing that conflict forward. We're really running from the conflict in a way through Fellowship of the Ring and seeing what's been left behind and what can't really be recovered and saved. There's a lot of deep layers to it. So anyway, leave me your thoughts down below about, what's your favorite Lord of the Ring book. Mine is my favorite from Lord of the Rings is Fellowship of the Ring for those reasons. And again, I really like book 1, just hobbits being hobbits, having their own adventures in the Shire. That just has it's a really fun and enjoyable read to realize that there's more to the Shire than just a place that Bilbo left from. So anyway, leave me your thoughts down below, and I will talk to you next time. Have a great day. Oh, newest book is actually up on Vela, so I'm going to do 2 updates a week for it. It's called Lawless Darkness. And I'll leave a link to it down below. This is like vampires versus angels. That's the best way I'll describe it, but there's more to it than that, obviously. But that's my log line. Like, oh, I want to see angels fight vampires in a world without a sun. Well, that's a book that you can read. I'll be updating it twice. People are wondering, what about The Bright Children? I don't want to read it on Vela. I will make that a real book this year at some point. I really have been hesitating on that because I don't have the other 2 books for the, I guess, the complete set done. So I would really like to be in a place where I can get those done and like release it as a full trilogy, but life has been busy. And I have other fantasy books I want to release so bad, including ones that are already done, ready to go. I just have to decide if I want to do the Vela thing with them or just put them out as a regular book. So leave me your thoughts down below about Kindle Vela. Like, is that something that you care about reading? I like to experiment, but are you like, no, I don't want Vela. I want just the normal books. You know, I like to just buy the ebook from you. So let me know what you think about that down below. And I'll see you guys next time. I'm looking at my face. I'm a little red-faced. Probably because I just finished working out when I did this video. So leave me a comment about my red face too if you want. And next time I don't know, I'll like desaturate it so you can't tell that I just like was on the treadmill for 45 minutes or something. So have a great one, and I'll see you guys next time.